Listen. So this is that movie that ends people coming out and admitting they're 1% Cherokee. It's easily one of the most brutal retellings of a dark part of history that's based on a book of the same name, focusing on the killers who were trying to wipe out the Osage, who at one point were the richest people on Earth. And while I think it's worth going out to the theater to go see it, I'm gonna be honest, it's 3 hours and a half, and you're gonna feel it if you're not in a recliner.
Well. What took you so long to get here?
So unless you're getting a catheter with your large drink and popcorn, know that it should be out on Apple TV soon. So whatever way you watch it, I just think it's worth watching because it's easily one of the best of the year. So with full spoilers, let me explain.
I said, well, I think the audience is ahead of us. They know it's not a whodunit, it's who didn't do it.
So the movie centers around the Osage people who were pretty much pushed away from their own lands down to this corner in Oklahoma that was meant to be all rocks in order to screw them over. But then they ended up finding oil, making them super rich, meaning that all the people who kicked them out before, they wanted it back. So eventually there would be blood.
When this money started coming, we should have known it came with something else.
The movie then follows this guy named Ernest who arrives in town to get a job, but you notice immediately how dumb he is. Like when he lands, this man joins a fight for no reason, even though he didn't plan on landing a punch. He's returning from a war where they said he was too stupid to even be out on the battlefield. And I know that people like suave DiCaprio, and they love when he's being very charming, but I just think he's great when he's playing an idiot.
Money flows freely here now.
I do love that money, sir.
Like, people will tell this man directly what the plan is, and it takes him the whole movie's runtime to figure out what's going on. This man's given a book, but he can't read. The whole 3 hours, he's moping around with this emoji-ass frown like he's impersonating young De Niro. And Mama's right. You keep your face like that, it's gonna get stuck.
Son, I got a question. You like women?
That's my weakness.
The main reason he moves into town is because of how rich his Uncle Hale is, and this man has so much power that he makes his relatives call him king. Hale has appointed himself as the sheriff, and even calls himself reverend without even being one, and everyone in town pretty much looks up to him because they've known him since they were kids, and he's given them so much, and that kind of makes him the sneakiest one out of all of them, because even when the murders start happening, he's the one collecting evidence and putting out the reward.
If anyone knows anything about it, you must come to me.
Because Ernest has a hernia from the war, his uncle decides to put him up as a cabbie so that he can pick up a certain woman, and that's where he picks up Lily Gladstone's Molly, who gives him a crash course on their town.
Why did you come here?
For my uncle. I work with him.
Because he's an idiot, he ends up becoming a robber as a side hustle who's always losing all of his money in gambling, interestingly enough, to a queen of diamonds. So his uncle starts teaching him how to steal money the legal way. Throughout the movie, he's always being called a snake or a coyote, so it's kind of crazy to think that he went from being the wolf of Wall Street to the wolf of the countryside, where he's killing off the flower moons like the opening line of the book says.
So many hungry wolves.
After being a dedicated Lyft driver, she ends up vibing with him and even buys him a hat as she lets him into her house like a vampire, where he slowly starts to suck the life away from her. And it's insane to think that at one point, I'm sure that Lily was charmed by DiCaprio, and it must have been really cool to have a kissing scene with him in a Titanic-like car. And then it turns out this man looks like this. Like, talk about acting. Give this woman the gold now.
Coyote wants money.
That money's real nice.
They eventually get married, where he's looking like Orville Redenbacher, and it has not been this painful seeing a man love his wife since Chance dropped the big day. Because this is where all the trouble begins.
We mix these families together, and that estate money flows the right direction. It'll come to us.
So the evil plan at play is that Uncle Hale, like many people, have been getting the settlers to marry into the Osage family so that they can then kill them and have the rights to all of their oil money. But while he has his little ring going on, there are also other people out there like Bill who are doing the same thing. Bill's married to Molly's sister Minnie, who ends up getting really sick and eventually dying, meaning that Bill ends up with all the head rights. And there's even a moment earlier when Hale had a one-on-one with his wife and is even speaking in her language, and it's a mix between him pretending to care about her, but really caring about her not dying on his dime because he's losing a piece of the pie to Bill, and that's sick. Even worse is that Bill immediately moves on to the next sister when Minnie passes. Sicker.
My wife likes her nice things, so
Not as much as you do.
The next sister who's targeted is Anna, who carries a gun in her purse, and that's why Hale keeps spreading this idea that that's what's gonna get her killed. But it's an interesting performance because Anna spends more time around town than all of the sisters, and she ends up with a different accent than them because she's almost like imitating a classic Hollywood actress, and that's even included in her wardrobe because they start seeing their traditional clothes as something that could cause trouble, so she's traded hers in for a mink scarf.
This blanket is a target on our backs.
On a rewatch, a crazy thing that I noticed was that on the day of her sister Minnie's death, you can see Hale giving her a flask while she's mourning, pretty much encouraging her to drink.
I really wanted the alcoholism to root from the pain of losing her sister. The fact that her family meant everything to her, and losing her best friend, Minnie, it devastated her. And so I asked Scorsese before we even started filming, I want this alcoholism to come from the pain of losing Minnie. So can we have Hale hand her a flask at the funeral? And he loved the idea, and that was the first scene that we shot.
On the day of her murder, we see a big fight happen in Molly's house where clearly Anna wants Byron, Ernest's brother, who's pretty much Hale's right-hand man. But unlike Ernest, Hale could never get Byron to marry in. That man would rather date a servant than be her man. So after getting slapped by Anna in front of his parents, Byron creepily says he's gonna take her home to Ernest. And of course, this dude just stares out into space. Byron also mentions the death of a man named Charlie who gets shot but isn't found till like way later. And in researching him, it turns out that his wife was the one who put a hit on him alongside the dude she was planning on marrying. And both got off scot-free.
Try and get rid of me, aren't you, snake?
Anna's eventually found shot by the river where the doctors decide to do an all-out autopsy right in front of everybody. And when you realize that the reason they're doing that is because the doctors were on Hale's payroll and were cutting up her brain in order to find the bullet, you just get a knot in your stomach. Plus, they even mentioned that Anna was pregnant, and Hale's first thought is to ask if they thought he was the baby daddy. Like, how much bootlegging was this man doing?
Their time is over.
At the funeral home, Ernest argues with the director who's trying to overcharge him for what he calls Osage prices, because everyone in town hates that they're filthy rich and don't have to work, which is why they're marrying and killing them so they don't have to work. And even when they're planning the burial, one of the funeral guys mentions how much money Anna left behind and pitches them using it for a town party. The nerve of these people.
I ain't got no nerves. None at all.
That's when Molly hires a private investigator, which was really risky back then, because a lot of them would like collect evidence and then conceal it, or they would go solve the case and then head out and find that guilty party, and if that guilty party can pay more money, they dip. In this case, Hale gets the brothers to go whack him, but if you zoom in, you notice that it's actually Byron with the weapon, because again, like the fight in the beginning and in the army, Ernest is just a minion. At this point, Bill also has his own investigation going on for Anna, because he knows that he's next, and he's trying to be the last one to the finish line.
I didn't realize this was a race.
The movie continues to show how bad Ernest is, because if you listen closely, he tells the funeral director to leave the jewelry on Anna's body, because eventually, his henchman Blackie shows up as a gravedigger and snatches it all. On top of that, he's so greedy that he sets up a side deal with Blackie to steal his car so that he can claim the insurance on it, kind of learning from his uncle's ways.
I just love money. I love it as much as I love my wife.
But of course, Blackie gets caught and arrested. Since Hale was looking to use Blackie for a hit job, he takes his nephew to the super secret room and spanks him so hard he breaks the paddle. But they ended up revealing that Leo was padded, so meth in my ass. Now this was an interesting scene because one, that Taylor Swift movie was playing next door, and I kid you not, she was singing "Look What You Made Me Do" as Hale was spanking Ernest. But it also is a scene where we learned a lot about Hale and how he's a 32nd degree Mason, which is why he's in that Twin Peaks-like room, because nobody has scarier secrets than they do. But it explains a lot about why he's doing what he's doing, because he's seeking out the highest rank of being a 33rd degree Mason, in where you have to be honored fully by your community. So this man buying up dance studios and being in every picture with everything that he's giving the town, it's not really because he cares, it's because he's 1 degree away from what he really wants. And that's why even when he meets up with his bootleg buddy Grammer, that guy rubs his awards in his face by saying, yeah, it's better than gold, it's recognition.
Whose land is this?
My land.
The next target Hale has his eyes on is Henry, who was actually married to Molly before, but now that he's found out that his wife is cheating on him with the town butcher, Henry's going through depression and wants to take his own life. And the only reason Hale doesn't stop him is because this man has a $25,000 insurance policy on Henry. And you see him even signing it earlier after a church scene.
It's $25,000 laying there.
After that, the mother passes with it being heavily implied that she was getting poisoned, and that's something Hale seemed to have gotten from Ernest when he arrived at the beginning, because Ernest mentioned that during the war he saw more people die from sickness than from bullets.
The mother, Lizzie,
He's not in good shape.
she won't last.
It was also very poetic the way that they showed the owl as a warning of death, and having the ancestors be the ones who the mom walked away with. And I just know that if an indigenous director would have done it, Sadly, most people wouldn't have bought tickets. After gaslighting Molly at dinner, she reveals that she's pregnant and they end up naming the child Anna, the same way that Anna was going to name hers Minnie. But the news pisses off the uncle, who then baits Ernest by telling him that Henry was Molly's ex, which he had no idea about, leading Ernest to hire an assassin named John Ramsey, who doesn't even want to do it until he learns it's an Indian, and then he thinks that's different. He just forgets to set it up as a suicide.
It's so simple. The front is the front, the back is the back. He has to make it look like it.
Hale tries to convince the deli guy who was cheating with Henry's wife to run away in order to make it look like he's guilty, and that's when you really see what the movie does best. It's showing you how the killers get away and set up people. And one of the things I missed the first time around was that he always had an alibi whenever a murder was going to happen. Like, they'd take the time to show you how Hale would go into town to take a picture, or head out to Fort Worth where he would also have witnesses and take a picture so it wouldn't come back to him. All while this man was looking like the Hamburglar. Ernest and Molly end up moving to the suburbs where the whole community has put up lights in their front yards in order to keep the murders away. And in the book, this actually pisses off the outsiders because they saw it as them flexing their oil money with how much electricity they were using. That's when Ernest threatens Bill for beating him at his own game, and that's what leads to them blowing up their house, killing Bill and Molly's sister Rita. And what's crazy is that in the movie and in the book, they mention how Molly and her kids were literally just over there before that happened.
When they come in, you get them.
This also leads to Molly's cry in the basement that is just gutting and is one of the standout scenes of the movie. And it's also when the movie's look changes since they've had all the Osage shots shot on film. The settlers are meant to look like old photographs. But after this explosion, you can see the whole movie get darker and desaturated. Even though Molly starts getting sick because of her diabetes, she ends up making the trek up to DC where they pay $20,000 to the government just to listen to their story.
Please send help. There's murder in Osage, and the police do nothing.
This causes Hale to get even more worried, and since he has the doctors in his pockets, he gets them to alter Molly's insulin shots by adding poison to every injection. But since Molly doesn't trust them, Ernest ends up being the one doing it, making this relationship sicker than Phantom Thread.
I love this girl.
Do you?
Now, Hale knew that Ernest's soft spot was Molly. So earlier when her sister Minnie died, Hale really pushed that idea of Bill failing to take care of her and not giving her the right medications, making Ernest feel like he needs to do everything he can to not feel like Bill did.
It shows itself to you that Bill Smith didn't take the proper care of Minnie the way he could have. To have her sick and die, take her hen rights and her land.
And I know that this is probably the most questioned part of the story, and I've seen people really divided by it, and the book doesn't reveal whether he knew or not, but it isn't until Ernest starts downing his uncle that he tries half of that vial himself and ends up getting sicker than a dog, which to me shows he didn't know. But yes, in the age of the internet, this man should have burned in hell. On a rewatch, you realize how sick they really are, though, because there's an early scene where Hale jokes about killing the Indians in front of the doctors when they're looking at Henry, and the doctor doesn't turn around because he's offended in hearing that. No, he turns around because he's shocked he's saying the plan out loud.
You gonna kill this Indian?
How'd you know?
The movie also shows real footage from the Tulsa Massacre that they're making a comparison to, since that happened a few hours away from them since they're both in Oklahoma. So you do end up with whiplash when, casually the KKK is just marching in the town parade alongside the Osage. But what's worse is noticing that Molly's guardian who controlled her money was also the guy leading the Klan. Even worse, this same dude is later on in the court, on the jury.
They're very hungry for power. They ain't gonna get it.
What's crazy is that Hale didn't even like the Klan because they were too conservative for him. Like, he's pretty much the racist liberal. This man was learning their language just to screw them over. He would boast about bringing them into the 20th century like they owed him something, not realizing that all the fancy medicines he was touting, they were only needed because they also brought in the diseases.
They were sick people. They're kindly people, big-hearted people, but they're sickly.
A lot of the fraud they did was also not even illegal. Like, it was part of the law. This was a town of 5,000 people, yet they had 75 attorneys. They would consider it federal land one day and Indian land the other day whenever they needed it to be. And they really had these rich Osage people calling themselves incompetent because they ended up running all the banks for them and all the Osage had to ask for their own money. Like, can you imagine inviting someone to your land and they end up controlling all of your essentials and then slowly kick you out? That's insane.
Back in the old days, they would miss the Indian point of view in a movie by a mile.
Right.
Now they're missing it by feet.
Honestly, when you really look at it, they weren't just looking to kill them, but to completely end their traditions. So, with all that Marvel talk, Scorsese was really coming out with this movie saying, Wakonta forever.
I was sent down from Washington, D.C. to see about these murders.
See what about them?
See who's doing it.
Jesse Plemons eventually arrives as a Texas Ranger in the 9th inning, and he's representing the FBI that barely is getting put together by J. Edgar Hoover, someone who Leo played in a movie before. And in the original story, it focused more on this character solving the case, and it kind of was playing it off like a detective thriller, but they rewrote the movie since they felt that the twist was going to be too obvious. Plus, if people found this version insensitive, imagine telling a story where it all leads up to a Scooby-Doo villain reveal at the end. So when people say that they want it to be more like the book, ask them if they read the book. Hell even makes fun of how long it took them to get there, since clearly it wasn't all about the Osage dying, but Bill being detonated that got them there.
We were sitting down going through some of the court documents and the testimonies from this, and people were talking about the house blowing up. And in the documents from this and the court transcripts, they only talked about Bill Smith, the character played by Jason Isbell. There was no mention of Rita.
Hale starts to tie up all the loose ends by pulling a looper. He sets up Blackie to get arrested again with a bank robbery. He sets up AC, who they hired to blow up the house, to rob a dance studio after letting the owner of the dance studio know to shoot him, and even his buddy Grammer gets killed. But we just see him crash in a car after someone was chasing him, which is kind of my thing. If you're going to show all the violence on the Osage multiple times, don't hold back on the violence for the killers.
We have so many deaths we've lost count.
After several roadblocks, the FBI starts piecing things together as they have an undercover native getting some insights, who I'd see a whole movie of, and another guy who was previously an insurance agent, undercover as an insurance agent, who realizes all of the fraud that Hale is pulling, since he's recently burned down his own farm. If you pay close attention, you can see that at the beginning of the movie, this man has a whole bunch of cattle, but by the end, Hale only has a small corral, which is why he's pulling insurance fire fraud. And this agent is also probably the reason why Hale had issues cashing in on that insurance for Henry.
I'm gonna tell you who did it.
Plus, the only reason they got a lead was because this old guy told the truth only because he was about to die.
You gotta tell me what you told them. All of it, what you tell them.
I told him all of it.
All of it?
They end up arresting Ernest and interrogating him with Blackie as they keep him locked up for about 2 months. And because of that, there's a scene where the uncle goes to visit Molly, which he questions if it's real or not. And I think he was there poisoning her since, Ernest has been gone. And it isn't until Hale gets arrested that the authorities finally are able to take Molly to the hospital and she gets better.
Are you a married man?
Yes, sir.
If your wife died, who would get her money?
We then get a couple of late appearances from John Lithgow as a prosecutor who came in like CA and Oppenheimer. And 3 hours in, we then get the court scene where Ernest has to testify. And Brendan Fraser comes in looking like a wrecking ball. I know people have been making memes of him, which honestly are all hilarious, but calling out his performance would also be calling out Marty's direction and casting, all right? It's clearly done on purpose. He's supposed to be the big town lawyer who's from out of state, meaning that he has this goofy city boy way of speaking, just like Anna spoke differently than her sisters. I think he's supposed to come off over the top because that's exactly how all the people in the room see him.
These government men, they're giving you the rope to hang yourself.
So after holding Ernest for 2 months in order to testify, Hale's dream team is able to stop him by stepping in as lawyer and really having this man say,
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer that question on the grounds that it might tend to incriminate me.
Now, the wolf scene, in my opinion, is one of the most important, since Marty went on record saying that everyone was implicated. Like, there will be scary parts where they'll show scenes in the movie that seem to not go anywhere, but it's because those were real transcripts, real lines that people said who were never caught.
Including Bill Hale's wife telling the doctor to get furniture out of the house. Now, what's that about? And by the way, this is based on actual things. They were told to get good stuff out of the house.
This scene shows how many people were in on it, including the big oil CEOs who all looked the other way. When Henry's getting set up, they show you oil workers who legit were staring at him for days, but also looked the other way. And I think it shows the worst part of how everyone was involved. They just stayed silent. Because the bad guy isn't always going to be this mustache-twirling Disney villain.
People say, well, that type of person, that sort. I guess what that means is that they try to distance themselves from them. It's someone else, it's not me. But in actuality, I feel it's not someone else, it's us, it's you and me, and maybe if we had been born under different circumstances, maybe we would have wound up doing exactly the same things.
That's why the title is so important. We already know who did it. The movie's breaking down how they did it and how people continue to get away with stuff like this. Several movies have covered this, but I think it's caused a lot of confusion because a lot of people don't realize that being the main character doesn't mean they're a good character.
Too literal, too violent, too metaphorical, too dark. Here, we have the protagonist, but where's the antagonist? Huh? Where's the drama?
Studios are now putting out disclaimers or warnings at the beginning of their movies because a lot of people seem to not get it. Like even recently, I've been noticing people figure out that a lot of Scorsese's movies were actually calling out the bad guys. They just put you so into their evil minds that people took it the wrong way.
And I want you to understand, we don't do anything illegal.
And now they got this man doing explainers in his interviews.
As we know now, tragically, it's a norm. Every other person is like Travis Bickle now.
The sad truth is that it usually ends up being violence that gets people to tune in and not the positive stories. It's like it's not an Oscar-worthy performance unless they're going through agony. And it was crazy to see a lot of people who were complaining about this movie not being able to name another indigenous movie that came out this year. But if a movie has people complaining that the bad guys are too bad or also the bad guys are too good, usually that means it hits the mark at portraying the sad but raw truth, not something that leans the way that'll make people more comfortable.
Can you find the wolves in this picture?
Get it? The motion picture. They end up testifying in Anna's death, and it's just scary how chill they are retelling it. They even show a flashback to how Molly damn near tucked Byron in after coming back home from killing her sister. And when they show this Kelsey guy, I damn near vomited. This man looks like if Walter Jr. broke bad and was running an illegal whiskey yacht that was poisoning people. He's the dude early on when Ernest meets Molly, who boasts about having a full-blooded wife like a creeper. He dances at their wedding with his goofy line dancing when it should have been their traditional music playing. And then of course, he's the sicko who planned to adopt 2 Osage kids as long as he could then kill them and get their head rights. Legally.
It's real complicated. Sometimes you got to do one thing even though you mean to do another thing. But I'm not in any kind of trouble at all. None at all.
After Ernest is forced to sign a paper so Hale can get his rights, and learning that his uncle even had a hit out on him, it's the death of his baby that makes him realize how his uncle has been using him. Like there's a slick edit when he meets Molly where it cuts to the sisters' photographs and then punches in, and I took that as him already kind of knowing who they were since the uncle must have given him a photograph. Like even when the uncle realizes that they finally met, he gives the brother a side eye. Hale even gives Ernest a book about wolves in order to incept in his mind that dog mentality and the way he wants the order of things.
Through one lens, you see a very organic attraction forming, and through another lens that Molly is pretty unaware of, you see a calculated arrangement happening.
And when Ernest is on the stand, he's asked if his uncle directed him into marrying his wife. And Leo's face is crazy. It's as if he realized right then and there that as much as he thought he loved her in his vile, disgusting way, he was also being duped the whole time by his uncle, as the book states. And you even see it in Molly's face, who questions him right after about the shots, just for him to deny it like a coward.
Have you told all the truths?
In the end, the movie tells you that Ernest and his brother did end up going to jail, but were eventually let out pretty early, living out the rest of their days in a trailer park together. Hale ended up getting served with a lifetime sentence, but then also got out early, dying in a nursing home, with many Osage even forgiving him because, as Hale put it, people forget. They don't care.
I've heard there were some Osage that were at his funeral.
That's right.
Yeah.
Believed until the day he died.
Yeah.
And after that he was their friend, that he wasn't guilty of what he was charged of.
As for Molly, they mentioned that she remarried and had grandchildren, eventually passing at age 51, where they buried her next to her sisters and her daughter.
And just one really striking detail I found in an archive about Molly. In 1934, just 2 years before she died of natural causes, I found a document saying where she had appealed her incompetency and she was deemed competent. She was finally granted the rights of a full-fledged citizen to have access to her money and her resources.
All of this is told after a time jump where a radio show was retelling this case. They've got Jack White up there as the host. And reading up on it, it turns out that the FBI was the one funding these because they would use the files that they had on all these crimes and investigations and then sell tickets for the show that would make the FBI look pretty good. Obviously, it also sounds a lot like the true crime craze and live podcasts that turn all of the goriest stories into entertainment. And they even go at the awkward sponsors by having it be promoted by Lucky Strike and adding a line in the reading where Ernest asked for a lucky strike after getting out for the murders, sounding like,
"Shortly thereafter, Gerald Bobkins swung mercilessly at his wife's head with a golf club. She was never seen again." This episode is sponsored by Sports Zone, Upgrade your game with top-of-the-line golf.
The last person to come out and read is Scorsese, who made a tiny cameo earlier when Molly goes to DC and they take a picture. But here it's fully breaking the fourth wall as all the music and sound effects stop. And it's clear that this is him being really meta on storytelling, especially with him being an outsider, and how he wants to use his reach to get the story out there in order to get people talking. I think he got people talking.
If it didn't upset people, there's something wrong with it.
I think it's more than Marty being a martyr, but saying that this isn't the only one project that's going to be out there on this story. There will and should be more. He's just speaking to his audience, hoping they listen.
He's exploiting this story, and he's just another non-Osage who's reaping the benefits of this story for his own purposes. Now, how do you respond to that?
Well, I hope not.
Those comments that the Osage should have wrote this book, there was plenty of opportunity for someone to write that book, but no one did. And so I can't imagine why they would say something,
The movie then ends with a shot of the surviving Osage people chanting in the fields where the flowers used to be, making up the colors as they dance around the drum set, fading to the credits where the audience then sits in the rain, reminiscing, just like Molly said earlier in the movie.
Storm, it's powerful. So we need to be quiet for a while.
It's good for the crops, that's for sure.
Just be still.